Tractate Menachos, Daf Yomi. Tractate Menachos, page 25b. With the words Uramini, and the Gemara raises a contradiction from another brayta. Al ma hatzitz meratzeh, al hadam, v'al basal, v'al chelev, shenitzma, ben b'shogeg, ben b'mezid, ben b'oines, ben b'rotzoin, ben b'yachid, ben b'tzibur. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from another brayta. For what does the front plate worn by the high priest affect acceptance, or atonement, or forgiveness? It affects acceptance for the blood, for the flesh, and for the fat of an offering that became impure in the temple, whether they were rendered impure unwittingly or intentionally, whether due to circumstances beyond one's control or willfully, whether in the case of the offering of an individual, or in the case of a communal offering. In contrast to the statement of the previous brayta, this brayta teaches that the front plate does affect acceptance in the case of an individual offering for blood that became impure and was sprinkled intentionally. Amar Rav Yosef lo kasha. Ha Rav Yossi ha Rabbanan. Tanya, ein tolbin minatome alatoy. Im Torah mishoigeg trumasay truma. Mezid ein trumasay truma. Rabbi Yossi omer ben mishoigeg ben bemezid trumasay teruma. Rabbi Yosef said, this is not difficult. This brayta, which teaches that the front plate affects acceptance for impure blood of an individual offering that was sprinkled intentionally, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, whereas that brayta, which teaches that the front plate does not affect acceptance, is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, as it is taught in brayta. One may not separate truma from ritually impure produce for ritually pure produce, and if he separated truma from impure produce unwittingly, his truma is considered truma. But if he did so intentionally, the sages penalize him, and his truma is not truma. Rabbi Yossi says, whether he did so unwittingly or intentionally, his truma is truma. Like the ruling found in the second brayta, where Yossi does not distinguish between a case where one acted unwittingly and where one acted intentionally. Eimar d'shemat le'Rav Yossi lo kanis d'miratzi tzitz alechilas mishemat le v'tanya Rabbi Eliezer omer atzitz miratzi alechilos Rabbi Yossi omer en atzitz miratzi alechilos. The Gemara objects to the comparison. You can say that you heard the Rabbi Yossi holds that the sages do not penalize him. Did you hear him say, as the brayta teaches, that the front plate affects acceptance for the impurity of the portions of offerings that are to be eaten? But isn't it taught in a brayta that Rabbi Eliezer says the front plate affects acceptance for the impurity of the portions of offerings that are to be eaten? And Rabbi Yossi says the front plate does not affect acceptance for the impurity of portions of offerings that are to be eaten. The Gemara answers reverse the opinions, so that Rabbi Eliezer says the front plate does not affect acceptance for the impurity of the portions of offerings that are to be eaten, and Rabbi Yossi says the front plate does affect acceptance for the impurity of portions of offerings that are to be eaten. Maskif l'Rav Sheishes Ubi matzis abchat la ve'ataya yachal vasar shenitma lifnei zrikas damim yiyu chayovin aleihem mishum tumam. Rav Sheshet objects to this, and are you able to reverse the opinions and say that according to Rabbi Eliezer the front plate does not affect acceptance for the impurity of portions that are to be eaten? But isn't it taught in a Braita one might have thought that one who partakes of impure sacrificial meat, meaning one who partakes of the meat while in a state of ritual impurity, before the sprinkling of the blood takes place, is liable for eating it due to violation of the prohibition against partaking of the meat while ritually impure. Talmud lomar kol toil yochel baso nefesh asher toichel baso mezevach asher Hashem to baso yalav nichasa hanitar toichel chayav alav mishum tumah. To counter this, the verse states, everyone that is ritually pure may eat of it, Leviticus 7:19, and immediately afterwards the verse states, but the soul that eats of the meat of sacrifice of peace offerings that belong to the Lord, having his impurity upon him, that soul shall be cut off from his people. Leviticus 7:20, the juxtaposition of these verses teaches that if one who is impure partakes of that which has become permitted to those who are ritually pure, he is liable for eating it due to the violation of the prohibition against partaking of the meat while ritually impure. But if one who is impure partakes of that which is not permitted to those who are pure, he is not liable for eating it due to violation of the prohibition against partaking of the meat while ritually impure, since it is not permitted to eat the sacrificial meat before sprinkling of the blood. One who partakes of it, and at that point is not liable to receive karet for eating it while ritually impure. O eno ela nechal toirin chayavin alav mishum tuma v'shein nechal toirin ein chayavin alav mishum tuma oisyani es halon v'esayoyt v'shein nechal toirin. The Brisa continues, or perhaps is the verse teaching only that if one who is impure partakes of that which is eaten by those who are ritually pure, he is liable for eating it due to violation of the prohibition against partaking of the meat while ritually impure. But in a case where he partakes of that which is not eaten by those who are ritually pure, he is not liable for eating it due to violation of the prohibition against partaking of the meat while ritually impure, despite the fact that his blood has already been sprinkled. I would then exclude sacrificial meat that was left overnight, and meat that leaves a temple courtyard, which are not permitted to be eaten by those who are ritually pure, and I would derive that one who is impure, who partakes of them, is not liable for eating them. Therefore, the verse states that belong to the Lord, which teaches that the verse included leftover meat, and meat that leaves a temple courtyard in the prohibition, and one who partakes of them while impure is liable for partaking of them. One might have thought that I include in the prohibition the meat that was rendered pigul through one's intention of consuming it after its designated time, and the meat that was rendered notaros hainulan The Braita interjects, isn't notar identical to meat that was left overnight, and it has already been established that one is liable for partaking of leftover meat while in an impure state? Rather, what is meant is as follows. One might have thought to include in the prohibition even the meats that were rendered pigul, just as notar is included. Therefore, the verse states, of the meat of the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the term of the meat excluded one who is pure, who partakes of pigul. Es elu shehaisu lehem shasa koishel. The Braita asks, and what did you see to include these? Meaning leftover meat and meat that leaves the courtyard, to exclude those, meaning pigul. It answers, after the verse included some offerings and excluded others, you should say the following. I include these, leftover meat, and the meat that leaves the temple courtyard, as they had appeared of fitness after their blood was sprinkled before they were rendered unfit by being left over, or by leaving the temple courtyard. And I exclude these pigul, as they never had appeared of fitness, as they were already unfit when the blood was sprinkled. The Gemara, the Brayta concludes, and if you say that if that is the case, then with regard to sacrificial meat that became impure before the sprinkling of the blood, and one who was impure ate it after the sprinkling of the blood, for what reason is he liable for eating it due to violation of the prohibition against partaking of the meat while ritually impure if it never had a period of fitness? The answer is that he is liable because the front plate affects acceptance and the sprinkling is valid. Nitzba in, yotze lo. It arises from this Brayta that if the offering became impure, then yes, the front plate affects acceptance, but if in the case of sacrificial meat that leaves the temple courtyard, the front plate does not affect acceptance, and therefore it was never considered to have a period of fitness. Man, Shamad Le Damar, Ein Zikum Enes Niotze, Rabbi Eliezer, Gvekatoni, Liberazet Zitz, Alachilos, Rav Sheshet. Nice. Rav Sheshet now states his question. Who did you hear who says that the sprinkling of the blood is not effective in the case of sacrificial meat that leaves the temple courtyard? This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, as seen in Tractate Me'ilah 6b, and yet, although this Brayta is then clearly in accordance with his opinion, it teaches that the front plate affects acceptance for the impurity of the portions of offerings that are to be eaten. Therefore, this too is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and the opinions of the Brayta cited above should not be reversed. Rather, Rav Chizda said it is not difficult. This Brayta, which teaches the front plate affects acceptance for the impurity of the portions of offerings that are to be eaten, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, whereas that Brayta, which teaches that the front plate does not affect acceptance, is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. Eimar Shamet Le Eliezer Alachilos Teno Kanis Mishamet Le In Kiechad Shamet Le Rabbi Yossi Shamet Le Rabbi Eliezer Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Roman Ben Mishamet Meitz Roman. The Gemara asks, you can say that you heard that Rabbi Eliezer holds that the front plate affects acceptance for the impurity of the portions of offerings that are to be eaten. But did you hear him say that the sages did not penalize one who acted willfully? The Gemara answers yes, just as you heard that Rabbi Yossi holds with regard to Truma, that one who separated impure produce on behalf of pure produce is not penalized. You heard that Rabbi Eliezer holds the same. This is as it is taught in a Brayta. Rabbi Eliezer says whether one acted unwittingly or intentionally, his Truma is Truma. Eimar Dishamet Le Rabbi Eliezer Truma Dekila V'Kadosh Dechamim Mishamet Le Imkein Ha'amad Terimaya. The Gemara objects. You can say that you can say that you heard Rabbi Eliezer state this halakha with regard to Truma, which is lenient. But did you hear him say this with regard to consecrated items, which is more severe? The Gemara answers, if it is so that Rabbi Eliezer does not hold the same opinion with regard to consecrated items, to whom would you attribute this Brayta that rules that the sages did not penalize one who acted willfully? Rather, it must be that this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Ravina Amar, Ravina said, Tumasai ben Mishogig Mezid Hulza Zrikasai Mishogig Hulza Mezid Hulza. Ravina said that the contradiction between the two Braytot should be resolved as follows. With regard to the circumstances of the contraction of its ritual impurity, regardless of whether the blood was rendered impure unwittingly or intentionally, the front plate affects acceptance for the impurity and the offering is accepted, as the second Brayta teaches. By contrast, with regard to the sprinkling of the blood, if it was unwittingly sprinkled after becoming ritually impure, meaning that the priest was unaware that it was impure, then the offering is accepted. But if it was intentionally sprinkled after becoming pure, it is not accepted, as the first Brayta teaches. Rav Sheila Amar Zrika so Bein B'Shoigek Bein B'Meizid Hutza Tumasai B'Shoigek Hutza B'Meizid Hutza. Rav Sheila said the opposite resolution with regard to the sprinkling of the blood, whether it was performed unwittingly or intentionally, the offering is accepted. By contrast, with regard to the circumstances of the contraction of its ritual impurity, if it was rendered impure unwittingly, the offering is accepted, and if it was rendered impure intentionally, it is not accepted. ולרב שאלה, דקטוני שנתמה במשוגי במזי דוחי כלומר, נתמה במשוגי וזרקוי במשוגי במזי. The Gemara explains, and according to Rav Shela, concerning that which is taught in the second Braita, the front plate affects acceptance for blood that was rendered impure, regardless of whether it happened unwittingly or intentionally. This is what it is saying. If the blood was rendered impure unwittingly and one sprinkled his blood, whether it was sprinkled unwittingly or intentionally, is accepted.